Соединенных Штатов признали диктатуру армян. Что это такое?
Okay, we Okay, we First, I didn't think they're from the US.
Hello, hello. Hello, hello, Mr. Fetzer. Welcome to my program, Old Friends News. My listeners, this is the second time we're having together a television interview from state to state with a Mr. Jim Fetzer. How are you today, sir?
Oh, just fine. Delighted to be back. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, because there is lots of things happening for last 6-7 months, and now there is another ritualistic war started, and they choose Armenia. What's your input about it, Mr. Fetzer? What do you think?
Well, the latest outburst of fighting between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces began on the 27th of September. Hundreds of people have died. The largest escalation of a decades-old conflict over the specific region, Nagorno Karabakh, since the separatist war there ended in 1994, because of the strategic location of Armenia between Turkey, Iran, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. It's of considerable significance as to what takes place there. In earlier eras, of course, there was a kingdom of Armenia that was far more substantial. What's most important, I think, to appreciate here from a military point of view is that both sides have been supplied by Russia. They have a lot of Soviet-era equipment even, but most importantly, one side, the Azerbaijanis, are being supported by Turkey, whereas the Armenians have a security pact with Russia, which I believe is making all the difference in the end, while the Azeri forces are greater in number and have more weapons. The region, the geography is so mountainous and treacherous that the Armenians, with a smaller force, nevertheless have been able to keep them roughly at a stalemate, where we now have an agreement of a ceasefire where Russia intervened. After 10 hours of talks in Moscow, sponsored by the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, they agreed that the ceasefire should pave the way for talks on settling the conflict. Russia has a base in Armenia, and I believe that the Russians would be highly reluctant to give it up. I believe that Putin is concerned about the growing militaristic aspirations of the Turks, where President Erdogan seems to want to reestablish the Ottoman Empire if he's able, and has made inroads into Syria, where he regards the Kurds, some of whom have come to the defense of Armenia, as traitors to Turkey, as terrorists whom he would like to wipe out. I mean, completely, 100%. It's unlikely to happen, but won't be for lack of trying. Putin and President Erdogan have negotiated a series of deals to coordinate their conflicting interests in Syria and in Libya as well, and to expand their economic ties, where Turkey took delivery of a Russian S-400 missiles last year, which angered the United States. But the Russians have actually the best military equipment in the world. Their S-400s, S-500s are the best anti-aircraft missiles in the world. They have the best anti-ship missiles. They have an underwater anti-ship torpedo at a phenomenal rate and is essentially unstoppable. I have long worried that if the United States were drawn into a military conflict, large or small, with Russia, that our nation would not be happy with the outcome. The United States spends, hundreds of times more on military equipment than any other nation in the world, but unfortunately, a lot of that goes into the deep pockets of military contractors who, for the sake of their own profit margin, produce weapons that are actually not in good working order, have built-in problems that are going to require constant maintenance, so that by virtue of having additional contracts to maintain them, they can roughly double their profit margin, which means they really have a motive to produce inferior equipment. Russia, however, does not have the vast economic resources of the United States, and its contractors really aren't incentivized by a profit margin, and as a consequence, knowing the fate of the nation may hang upon the quality of their work produced time and again across a wide array of weaponry, far superior weapons, both defensive and, I dare say, offensive as well, where I believe Russia has proven to be a great source of stability in the world, contrary to the United States, up until the presidency of Donald Trump, who has somehow managed to keep the United States out of new wars. He has taken some actions that I have condemned, such as the assassination of General Soleimani in Iraq, which was not only a violation of Iraqi sovereignty, but of international law. It was a gross offense, where Soleimani had been a great hero in the Middle East, enabling diverse forces to even defeat the Israelis, which have widely considered the fourth most powerful army in the world. Yet Hezbollah and other forces with the assistance of Iran, but the brilliant leadership of Soleimani were able to defeat them in humiliation for which they have never been willing to forgive or forget. I therefore believe that Trump is making moves against Iran that are highly desired by Israel, but completely inappropriate. Iran is perhaps the most peaceful great nation in the world, having not launched a war of aggression against any other state since 1775, which I endlessly observe is prior to the ratification of the Constitution, which began in 1787, and prior to the election of George Washington as our first president, so that for longer than the United States has existed as a constitutional republic, Iran has not launched a war of aggression against any other state. It has, of course, defended itself against the massive onslaught by Iraq, which appears to have been provoked by the United States, where both sides lost on the order of 1 million men. That was most unfortunate, where Trump has nevertheless minimized, tensions with North Korea on the one hand, and moved with peace agreements, treaties between Israel and Bahrain, as well as United Arab Emirates on the other, where there are more in the offing, I have no doubt, which made him actually a viable candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. They have actually passed him by on behalf of a United Nations food project, but he was, in fact, a bona fide nominee with accomplishments of merit, unlike, for example, the last American recipient, Barack Obama, who essentially was given the prize on the basis of hopes and promises that did not materialize. Where, to further burnish his credential, Trump is now declaring he will have American forces out of Afghanistan by the end of this year, which is devoutly to be desired the war of the U.S. in Afghanistan has endured as the longest war ever fought by the United States, and it was never justified. Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11, and yet the invasion took place within weeks. It would take 3 years to get around to invading Iraq. But the fact is, Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with 9/11, nor did the 19 alleged Islamic terrorists, 15 of whom were from Saudi Arabia, because the whole event was actually orchestrated by Israel with collusion from the CIA and neocons who were dual U.S. Israeli citizens in the Department of Defense, who had come from the Project for a New American Century, which had been lobbying since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 for the United States to enter the Middle East and to exert military and diplomatic pressure outward from that geopolitically sensitive region, where the objective was to use American forces to take out the modern Arab states that had served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, and eventually to confront the Persian nation of Iran because of the intervention of Russia and Iran at the request of the democratically elected president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. The plan was brought to a halt, but where even American leaders, including Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John Brennan in 2012, created ISIS, a terrorist army, to wreak havoc in the Middle East, to rape, to loot, to pillage, to murder, one of the most disgraceful acts ever undertaken by Americans in any scenario in world history, and for which, once again, Barack Obama demonstrated conclusively that he was a most undeserving recipient of any peace prize. Early on in his administration, he even undertook 14 armed interventions in various regions of Africa alone. So the United States has a most checkered record. I would like to believe that Donald Trump is going to lead us to a more peaceful world. I reiterate that he did commit acts with which I was in complete disagreement, including being played over staged chemical attacks that led him to launch a series of cruise missiles into Syria that turned out to have minimal effect. But taking out Soleimani was of a completely different order of magnitude. That was a war crime, a violation of international law for which the United States must be held responsible.
Mr. Fetzer, this is what bothers me a lot, and I have great concern about, for what it's worth, about a position of Russia. I'm highly suspecting that Putin is the globalist because of his reaction on this masquerade so-called pandemic. His reaction, his recipes and suggestions were absolutely the same as throughout the Western world and world in general. I am suspecting highly. Lately, I became, after this so-called pandemic, I saw how the leaders of the world took their masks off and put it on our face, and I highly suspect, with pretty plenty of evidence, that Putin is a globalist. He's just working for the Eastern wing. That explains to me that why is Russia so slow? Why is Russia is not always kept this region in Nagorno Karabakh kind of unresolved, and why the Russia was selling weapons to Azerbaijan and Armenia, and also after the Russian airplane was shot down by Turks, a couple of days later he was doing kissy with Erdogan and selling him weapons again. I do suspect, highly suspect, Mr. Fetzer, this is all staged operation. They play in a good cop and a bad cop, because I cannot ignore or disregard the fact of the masquerade, which is a complete fraud. It's a complete war against the humanity. I'm just having a hard time believing it, that the countries that put masks on their citizens' face and get basically being directed from a private organization like World Health Organization, World Killed Organization, and now they're really opposing each other. I'm just having a hard time believing it. I think they're trying to uh, convince us again in an old story that there is U.S. against the Russia, Putin is against the globalists, because I've been watching and listening lots of Putin's suggestions that they're carbon copies of what the globalists are saying about artificial intelligence, about vaccines, about surveillance, about contact tracers, about social distances. And I do highly suspect that Putin is a traitor to anti-globalist movement.
Well, I think you're a very sophisticated guy. My opinion diverges. I have, to this point in time, though I could be convinced by alternative evidence that Vladimir Putin is the only true statesman astride the world stage, I believe he has been a force for stability in this world, and that Donald Trump has a comparable capability, and that good relations, improved relations between the United States and Russia would contribute toward that end, which he has sought, but which the American establishment has opposed vehemently, where we have had all of these ridiculous efforts to undermine the legitimacy of the Trump administration, which are increasingly being documented even in the mainstream, highly reluctantly, however, because it's virtually completely controlled by Zionists, dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, where I have a panel of 100 executives from CNN, for example, all of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, another panel from NBC of 100 executives, all of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, a third of 100 executives from the New York Times, all of whom are dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, where they have much too much control over the American media, and the fact that this coronavirus pandemic appears to be completely and totally fraudulent, that it's a political effort to destroy the United States, to bring about a massive transfer of wealth, where 90% of U.S. corporations, of which there are about 6 million, have 20 or fewer employees, 75% of which are going under into bankruptcy, where powerful bankers and other institutions can buy them up at bargain basement prices, so that, in fact, the consequences of all of this are only beginning to be felt, but where, subject to further developments, I believe that, in fact, in spite of the massive forces arrayed against him, that Donald Trump is going to win a landslide re-election and be able to bring some of these miscreant elements within the FBI and the Department of Justice into a legal framework where they can be subjected to appropriate indictment and punishment. Many of us have been very disillusioned that the Attorney General Barr and the Special Attorney Durham have not brought those indictments to surface yet, because the evidence has been overwhelming, simply overwhelming, of the corruption involved here. I won't belabor it for now. We have an election very near at hand, less than 2 weeks away or so. Well, on November 3rd, to be precise, so 3 weeks or so, that I think is going to be the most important in American history. That's often said, but in this case, I believe it is actually true, because the Democratic Party has been taken over basically by groups that are out to destroy America, that want to overthrow our form of government, even to the extreme of getting rid of socialism, giving everyone a guaranteed annual income, a whole host of issues leading to their endorsement by the Communist Party. And why, let me just add, by the way, Joe Biden, their nominee, was so mentally affected. He's lost his cognitive competence. He's on an anti-dementia medication that brings about incontinence, so that the Biden party asked for breaks after every 30 minutes as part of the 90-minute debate in order to change his adult diaper. So that I believe that, in fact, Joe Biden may have a life after politics making commercials for Depends. But where I observed as a student of the use of body doubles, where Hillary Clinton used 6 or 8 during the late stages of her campaign and effort, they've actually used a Biden body double during the first debate with Donald Trump. He's a more diminutive version of the real Joe Biden. He has brown eyes. Biden has blue. He has ears that come straight down to attach to his skin. Biden has bona fide earlobes. Biden ties his tie with a double Windsor. This guy ties his tie with a single Windsor. Biden's already had a skull implant for remote instructions coming from off stage. This guy had to have a wire. And it's amazing to me that they've gone all in. They even have put out now literature with Joe Biden featuring the fake Biden, the Biden body double rather than the real Biden. And he's making public appearances. I believe the real Joe Biden can never appear again. And I'm very, very troubled about the role of Jill Biden in all of this, because she clearly loved her husband in spite of his gross failings and was very enthusiastic about becoming First Lady. And I think it will be a tell as to whether we ever see Jill Biden with this Biden body double, call him the debate Biden, who is not the real guy.
Wow, that's quite an interesting information, Mr. Fetzer. I will look into it. I've never heard that. You kind of gave me a lot of food for thought. I'm going to look into it. But let's go back to the question about Armenia. Before the war, Lady Gaga, and we know she's a well-known Satanist, she made a video clip. It's called Armenia 911, which was showing, in that video, she was showing in the background, they were the writing in Armenian saying "be careful" or warning. Actually, I can translate that way. When I saw that video before the war started, I just knew that this is some kind of a warning for something they plan to do. You know that they like to give you the warnings before they do anything. This Satanist, right?
Yes.
And I think this war, basically, we know there is a war on a European man. We know that there was a war declared on a white man. We all know that. That's an open war that has been declared for a long time ago. Do you see a connection between why do they start from Armenia? Because historically, most of the European tribes begin their history from that place. That's why we call Caucasians. Or why did ritualistic war, which is 100% ritualistic war, I can go deep into the dates, when it started, what started, but nevertheless, I want to know your opinion. Do you think as an historical center of the European race ancestry, where it begins from, do you think that has to do also with some kind of a ritualistic sacrification? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I believe you have given more thought to this than have I, and I'm very respectful of your opinions. And nothing would surprise me here. I mean, it's just outrageous, because this really is an effort to take control of the whole world, especially by way of vaccinations that are going to introduce microchips. I in my academic research, I founded an international journal on minds and machines. I publish widely on artificial intelligence and establish that you cannot turn a digital machine into a thinking thing. In other words, you can't create inanimate objects are actually capable of thought. On the other hand, you can take thinking things such as human beings and apply to them techniques that may turn them into the equivalent of robots. And I believe that is the agenda that is being pursued. Bill Gates is an absolute monster, one of the most despicable figures in all of history. Dr. Anthony Tony the Rat Fauci, as I refer to him, has single-handedly done more damage to the United States than all the enemies of this nation throughout its history. So we have a great reckoning ahead of us. And I will say categorically that if there is funny business over this election, where we already have the early signs that Trump is heading for a landslide, we have 130 million armed Americans who aren't voting for Joe Biden. And I just say there will be a reckoning here in the United States.
Yes, I'm suspecting. I wish that my suspicion would not come true, but I do suspect that United States probably will be divided on an American-minded states, which would be the conservative-minded, libertarian-thinking states, which would be North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and the communist states, which probably, obviously, California would be one of the first, would be called People's Republic of California. And I do have the feeling I'm moving down to South Dakota that I'm looking for a political asylum towards the United States. And I even made a documentary. I call it like a trip running away from Soviet Union to United States. That's the feelings, that strong feelings that I have.
Just as another indication of your intelligence, this move was very appropriate. You timed it very well. And I compliment you. I was born in California. I grew up in Southern California, and the state has turned into what it was often referred to as comically la land, except now we have a governor who's effecting great damage on the citizens of California and even doing his best to disarm them. I predict it's not going to happen, and if he continues to pursue this, he will not like the outcome. But the Democrats have gone far overboard and seem to be, desperate in taking measures that heretofore would have been thought unimaginable in their efforts to prevent the reelection of a man the American people like a great deal and who's doing a lot on behalf of the nation.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I want to, I want to just finish on the note that, I try not to take any sides because I think there is a war on humanity we're facing very serious challenges right now, all humanity in the world. And I hate to be in a position of the person who takes the sides based on wishful thinking. I was a big believer of Putin being anti-globalist, but for last 6 months, more and more evidence came true that I am highly suspected that Putin is a traitor because last time I've heard him saying, "Oh, artificial intelligence is beautiful. We can enter a new era with our own technology. Imagine how good soldiers we can produce." Literally, I mean, this guy is insane. Maybe that's his double also. Maybe something else is going on we're not aware. But see, for Russia to keep the silence in the situation of Nagorno Karabakh, it's not only treasonous. I think it's criminal because if, according to my logic, if Putin would be anti-globalist, number one, he would never let the Armenian so-called premier minister, the Pashinyan, being placed in Armenia because he knew it's coming. Nothing was done to prevent it. That's number one. Number two, everybody knew the Azerbaijanis having a lot of military, training, and they accumulate a lot of military around the borders of Armenia. Everybody knew that. And I would never believe in million years that Putin and other forces they didn't know about it. I would never believe in a million years they were aware of this. I get my guess is this been a played this whole global game of reduction of population. Of course, that's big part of it. Vaccines, and then the wars, then the food shortage, diseases, whatever it is, whatever means they're going to use. And I believe, which is a scary thought, but I do believe, I wish I'm wrong, Mr. Fetzer, but I do believe that the Putin is a sellout because people are very unhappy with him. I had several interviews with the Russian former Putin supporters who's completely disappointed by him, completely. And they all stood up against him. We're not talking about the Soros finance color revolutionaries. No, we're talking about the real Russian patriots who who is on our side of sovereignty and anti-globalism. And 90% of these people, I would say roughly, turn their back to Putin because they're very unhappy with his global agenda, globalist thoughts and his behavior. I
Well,
just
I'm
want to
very
shed.
impressed by your reasoning here, and you may well be right. Count me the optimist. But I'll tell you, even though I may be mistaken in my regard for Putin and for Trump, we're certainly in the clutches of testable hypotheses. We're going to see which of us is right and which of us is wrong in relatively short order
That
because
is
we're at a truly pivotal moment in world history. And if you're right and I'm wrong, then the fate of the world hangs in the balance and is going to be far more desperate and dreary than I would prefer, any of us would prefer. So we shall see. I do believe very confidently that Trump is going to win an historic
oh
reelection.
yeah, yeah.
Even Gallup, which has historically been pretty good and reliable to presidential elections, is predicting that Trump is going to be reelected by a landslide.
Oh
And I
yes.
say, under those conditions, the Democrats had best be very wary of how far they go to provoke the American people, because we've already seen massive efforts to undermine the results of the 2016 election and aren't about to stand for that happening all over again in 2020. Conclusion. So I think it's all right. I think you're a really smart guy, and I enjoy these conversations, and I'll look forward to another when we can assess where things stand at that point in time.
Yes, Mr. Fetzer. I mean, thanks for the compliment. I mean, hearing these kind of compliments from you, that's a big honor, believe me, because you're, like I told you, you're one of the most intellectual Americans that I've ever known, most honest and brave men. And my listeners, I'm glad that I had a chance to introduce you to my listeners. They've heard about a little bit about Paul Greg's Roberts, a little bit. Several other people were translated, and like David Icke and others. But I am the only one who introduced you to the Armenian, Russian, European public, and even the most Americans who live here never heard about your work. And I really appreciate you coming to this program. And I, as an Armenian, that I'm an American, but I'm Armenian first before anything.
Well,
I really wish my soldiers, my people, not to listen to provocateur globalists that has been put in Armenia. They're doing their job regardless of politics, and our guys with a much less equipment and quantity are pretty much standing up for their ancestors' lands. And I want the Turks and Azeris and all the globalists to know they're not going to be successful.
well, I have a very dear friend who's Armenian, Alan Solarian by name, who's a psychiatrist who was the head shrink for the FBI and its rapid response teams until he sought to expose corruption by the CDC, interestingly, where John Rappaport has now observe that the CDC in a recent document acknowledged that it has never been able to isolate the COVID-19 virus, which means the whole episode we've been living through has been basically being chased by a phantom. I'm sorry to say, this is monstrous. I've done a great deal in effort to expose it. Let me mention where those who might want to pursue some of my research can find it. On Twitter, I'm doing a new show, a daily update called Need to Know. That's Twitter at Jim Fetzer, discussing many of these issues, including the use of a Biden double during the debate, where Hillary used a Hillary double during the debates with both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in 2016, shocking as it may be to hear. In addition, I have a blog at jamesfetzer.org where you can find this new report by John Rappaport that is so significant, jamesfetzer.org. And then third, last but not least, I have a new website called jimtheconspiracyguy.org, where you can find about 4 dozen in-depth reports I've done, about 3 dozen of which are interviews with very prominent figures, and the other in depth about the coronavirus pandemic, medical emergency, or political phenomenon, about the DNC-CV conspiracy, where the Democratic Party has used Antifa and Black Lives Matter as their vanguard as a way of raising money for the Democratic Party, where it turns out that donations to Black Lives Matter go directly to Act Blue and into the pockets of Democratic Party figures like Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Pete Benedict, the whole shebang, and a host of others about very serious issues. So I'm just delighted we have made contact. And, I think very highly of the Armenian people who suffered one of the great tragedies of world history with the Armenian genocide perpetrated on the Armenian people by the Turks. And therefore, of course, they are very appropriately distrustful of any efforts involving Turkey in any way, shape, or form to intervene in Armenian affairs, which is very wrongful acts by this man who I believe has, great ambitions to restore the greatness of Turkey of the past, but is going about it in ways that may be just as ruthless and brutal as those that Turkey has exercised in the past. So we must all be aware of what's going on here. It's a very sensitive region, and I believe we should be grateful that there has been a ceasefire agreement worked out with the assistance of the Russian leadership, for which I give credit.
Yes, that is true. There is lots of underwater rocks in that river. We shall see, like you said. And we'll see. Time will show us what's going on, really. And Mr. Fetzer, I really appreciate your time. I really do. And my listeners would love this program. And I will place links to your Twitter, to our interview. I'll send you one. And let's keep up the good work. Let's keep thinking and finding the solutions. What can we do to help humanity? Especially, I think there is a very significant times right now, because I do believe there is a war. There is a war, especially on a European race. I do believe that. I'm firmly convinced in it.
Oh, yes. I agree, too. There's an effort here to eradicate the white race. I mean, it's absolutely astounding. Who would have ever thought such a thing could come to pass? But that appears to be what we are up against indeed. And I'm very grateful to you for introducing me to your audience, which I otherwise would be unable to reach under any circumstance that would normally come to my opportunities. So this is wonderful, and I'm very appreciative.
Thank you, Mr. Fetzer. I really, I love all races and the whole humanity. For me, it's very important and very dear. But we shall not forget that we as Europeans being attacked to the point that they want to eradicate us, mix us with all kinds of other cultures, and just
Yes.
make us forget who we are. So I believe the war in Armenia, it is a way deeper than just a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Oh, I think it's
It is,
entirely, I think you may be exactly spot on about this. So we shall have to continue to pay close attention to these developments.
yes, sir. Well, thank you, Mr. Fetzer. Thank you very, very much. So I'm looking forward to do more interviews with you. I want to thank you also on behalf of my listeners and everyone who is a thinker, who doesn't wear the mask when he's going to the restroom by himself in the middle of night, and who will stand up for his freedoms, especially us Americans. We've been given such a beautiful constitution. We shall stand up and fight for it. We should
More,
not keep
more,
quiet.
more interviews would be my great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fetzer. Thank you.